A parent's best curriculum in 3 parts. Part 1 will be an overview of brain development and the implications of such. A practical look of how to work with the developing mind. That's what the parent's best curriculum is about. It's working with the designer of your child. It's applying the principles that we've looked at throughout this seminar in practical ways. Part 2 will be another practical look, but an in-depth look at several ideas and concepts, practical things, practical activities that you can do in the day-to-day life. And then part 3 will be a practical application of some school subjects, how to learn those in the early years in a practical way. So without further ado, let's get started. Part 1, throughout the child's development, especially during the first 8 years, the brain goes through stages in which it must have a particular type of experience or input or mental stimulation, or it will miss out. These are known as critical periods. The critical period for bonding, for example, is from birth to 18 months. A critical period for spirituality is from birth to 8 years. A critical period for cause to effect reasoning is from birth to 10 years. For language acquisition, it's birth to 13 years. For reading, well, there really is no critical period. And in these stages, it's not the amount of input received, but rather the timing of the input and the mental stimulation that's important. There's actually a well-known series of experiments done with kittens that illustrates this very well. Kittens have a group of cells in the visual cortex known as vertical feature detectors. Those are the detectors that allow them to see vertical lines. Like trees, for example, is a good example of a vertical line. And during the period of about 8 to 9 weeks, these groups of neurons become ripe, meaning that they're organizing and myelinating during that 1 week period. So because kittens have this specific critical period of development, it makes it very easy to study critical periods. So scientists have done some experiments on this. And in one experiment, scientists took groups of kittens and blindfolded them during that 8 to 9 week period. What happened? Despite a full dose of visual stimulation and otherwise normal vision later on, they never learned to see the visual lines. Later examination of their brains showed that the neurons designed to do this job simply failed to develop because they received no stimulation during the critical period of development. And in further experiments, groups of identical twin kittens were used just to make sure this wasn't genetic. And they would blindfold one twin and not the other. The one that was blindfolded never learned to see the vertical lines. In other experiments, they took blindfolds that allowed a full range of visual stimulation except for vertical lines. So they weren't completely blindfolded, they just were prohibited, so to speak, from seeing the vertical lines during that 1 week period from 8 to 9 weeks. The same results. Those kittens did not learn to see the vertical lines. So, but how does this apply to the human brain? Simply put, a child must receive the appropriate mental stimulation for the stage of development he or she is in, or the brain will not develop that ability very well. The critical periods for spirituality, for creativity, for cause to effect reasoning is from birth to about age 8. And there is no specific critical period for a lot of academic subjects, including reading. In another experiment, the kittens were reared in a dark room that contained a lever that they could push that was especially designed to light up this scene that they could view that would stimulate those vertical visual feature detectors. And up until 8 weeks, the kittens showed very little interest. They just occasionally would push on it and not really pay much attention to it. But during that 8 to 9 week period, they pressed it almost constantly. They couldn't stop looking at that input that was giving them the important brain stimulation for that age. This applies to children. A child will naturally want to learn a particular thing when they reach that corresponding stage. And this is why children enjoy playing and learning in a hands-on fashion. Developing hand-eye coordination and motor skills is so important at this stage. So God has designed the young child to naturally do what will encourage this type of learning. And they're called critical periods because, as I mentioned, if the child does not get the experiences needed for this particular stage, they will never learn what they were meant to learn as well during that stage. If they don't get practical, hands-on experience prior to this 8 or 10 age, they will never really learn it very well. And this is why we shouldn't be pushing those early academics at an early age. Cause to effect reasoning is a very clear example of this. Practical hands-on experience teaches the cause to effect reasoning, and if a child doesn't learn this before about age 10, studies show, he will never learn it very well. In another experiment, 2 identical twin kittens were placed in a large circular tub. And in this tub was a revolving balance beam with a basket on each end. And in one basket, a kitten was placed, and in the other one, his identical twin brother was placed, but his legs could protrude from the bottom of the basket, so he could walk and he could turn this balance beam around inside this tub. And the walls of this tub were painted with vertical lines. Okay, so you got this mental picture going on. So as this kitten walked around, he gave his brother a free ride. They were not blindfolded. They both could view those vertical lines during that 8 to 9 week period. But the kitten who just sat there and didn't do anything never learned to see those vertical lines. Only the kitten who had his feet on the floor, knowing where he was, aware of his position on the floor relative to the lines, developed these connections. Experience shapes brains, but you need to interact with the experience. Movement is critical for learning. Not only does it stimulate brain regions that control learning, but science actually shows that movement provides this sort of context for the brain. Just like movement provided context for that kitten to develop the ability to see vertical lines, movement provides a context for the young mind to learn altogether. And studies actually show that the eyes need movement with the head and the neck and the core muscles in order to develop properly. Young children need to receive and experience the stimulation appropriate to each stage of the development. And we've already seen the appropriate stimulation up until age 8 is not tests and workbooks and math problems. The distinguished Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget did some of the most extensive studies on brain development, on child development. It's said that no single person has had a greater impact on the study of cognitive development than Jean Piaget. Piaget mapped out 4 stages of development that occur throughout the life of the child. Number 1, the sensory motor stage. That's from birth to 2 years. Number 2 is the pre-operational stage from 2 to 7 years. The stage of concrete operations occurs from approximately ages 7 through 12, and the stage of formal operations from 12 through adulthood. There's an interesting statement from the book Desire of Ages, a book about the life of Christ, about his childhood, and it says, "The child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. In the sunlight of his father's countenance, Jesus increased with wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. His mind was active and penetrating, with a thoughtfulness and wisdom beyond his years, yet his character was beautiful in its symmetry." Here's what I want us to notice. The powers of mind and body developed gradually in keeping with the laws of childhood. There are laws of childhood development. God designed it that way. They go through stages. They develop gradually. And that's just how God made them. So it's very interesting that Jean Piaget has recognized these stages of development throughout the life of the child. And there's, of course, variation among children, and there are many other developmental milestones than just these stages of Piaget's. But they're an excellent guide in the study of child development, and I'm going to use them as a framework for this session as we look at the developmental process and practical ways to work with it. So Sensory motor stage, stage 1. With a change from helplessness to near complete mobility, the first 2 years are a time of amazing growth, physically and mentally. Simple skills are often learned independently, and then they're sort of integrated into more complex skills, and the baby builds on those. Be sure to lay a foundation with good nutrition during this time. And of course, breast milk is best. Breast milk is best for physical health, for brain development. It contains essential components for brain myelination, actually. In one study, by age 2, babies who had been breastfed exclusively for at least 3 months had enhanced development in key parts of the brain compared to children who were fed formula exclusively or were fed a combination of formula and breast milk. The extra growth was most pronounced in parts of the brain associated with language, emotional function, and cognition. Brain development and myelination from about birth through 15 months approximately is focused on touch, food, shelter, and safety. And this is best achieved through a warm, loving, stable relationship with the mother. Sensory development begins with the vestibular system, and then hearing, and then touch, and then smell, taste, and finally sight. Motor development goes from reflexes to core muscles, to the neck muscles, to the arms and legs, to rolling over, to sitting up, to crawling, and finally walking. But don't be in a rush to get your child walking. Allow plenty of crawling time. Encourage it for as long as possible. Crawling actually helps develop the hand and wrist muscles that help handwriting in later years. It helps develop the corpus callosum, which is a critical link between the two hemispheres, and it aids in the development of brain areas which are necessary for good reading skills. That's right, crawling is good for reading later in life. Don't use jumpers and walkers and these car seat baby carriers, except when in the car, of course. Don't use them any more than absolutely necessary. Allow natural exploration of the environment. Research tells us that there must be movement associated with vision for vision to develop properly. And spending too much time in a carrier or a jumper or a baby carrier limits this important vision development, and it prevents the core and neck muscles from developing properly. Studies show that toddlers develop best when they are just free to explore, uninhibited by man-made hindrances. Even just lying on the stomach, exercising the neck and the limbs, lying on the stomach and lifting the head up, is beneficial, studies show. Sensory experience affects both the size of individual neurons and the structure of their interconnections. Children at this age understand the world, and this age, once again, this is the sensory motor stage from 0 to 2 years. Children at this age understand the world through objects they have personally and physically experienced. Many actions are sort of discovered by accident, and then they're repeated and perfected. It's of utmost importance that a child of this age experience something real, and thus, the more hands-on, the better. Let the child handle and feel objects, just simple ones, like cups or spoons or blocks or blades of grass or mom's face or dad's whiskers. That's always exciting. Toys aren't really necessary at this age, but if you do have toys, just have a few. And allow toys that allow children to interact on a physical level with them. Everyday objects are far better than toys. They need to touch them, they need to handle them, and yes, taste them. A child banging 2 pans together is getting far better brain food than one pushing buttons to create noises produced by hidden electronic parts. The child should be able to link cause and effect, to see how the parts of the toy work, according to Dr. Jane Healy. Infants and toddlers often enjoy handling objects and dropping or even throwing them to see what happens. Allow this as much as possible. They're sort of conducting mini science experiments just to see what happens when they do something. They're learning to link cause and effect. Don't hover over your child and control how he does things. Remember that he learns best from experience. As long as there's no risk for serious injury or physical harm, just allow them to explore naturally, to experiment. Any attempts at academics at this stage are futile and damaging. Studies have shown that children with overly pushy or over-controlling parents, typically who are pushing academics to give their children a head start, have problems with motivation, discipline, and personal adjustment. Let the learning be incidental and practical through the things of everyday life. A solid base of concrete learning, of touching, feeling, manipulating, needs to come before more abstract learning like the alphabet and numerals. Here's some examples. Listen to the birds and the animals in their natural setting. Tell them what they are. Have them try to mimic those sounds. That's lots of fun. Let him see and smell and touch the flowers and the plants. Watch the fish, the birds, the other animals. Tell him what they are. Don't make him memorize them, but just offer the information in a way that he can understand it and just leave it at that. He'll memorize far more on his own than if you try to force memorization. Have him play in the water. Have him feel the sand, the wet or the dry, feel the green leaves and the brown ones. You know, there's a lot of hype today about enriched environment. Now, the environment should definitely be enriched, but with the right enrichments. You may have heard that rats growing up in enriched cages where they have lots of things to do develop bigger brains than the rats who have just not had much to do. Interestingly, they've also compared rats that have been in a natural woodsy environment. Woodsy was the term used in the study. And they found that those rats had bigger brains than even the enriched rats. So the natural environment grows bigger brains than an artificial enriched environment. Don't overwhelm your child with too many toys or too much detail and excitement. TV and media definitely fall into this category, but so does an abundance of toys, of noise, and of activities. Remember that boring for you is not boring for your infant. A cup or a blade of grass can be a fascinating educational adventure. Introduce the objects and the toys just one at a time so as not to overwhelm the mind. Studies suggest that hyperstimulation can distort the natural development of the sensory organs and the nervous system. The best enrichments are natural ones. Sensory development is very important, including touch. Spend plenty of time cuddling, playing together, singing, and anything you can think of to enrich the sensory development in a natural way. Even with very young children, spend time in nature, explore the grass, find leaves, flowers, etc. And mother-child interaction is of utmost importance during this time. Allow time for quiet. The brain needs quiet downtime to organize itself and consolidate learning. Quietness, calmness, and freedom from artificial excitement build strength in the immature child. Do everything together. This is a great thing about this stage. You really can do everything together. Children desperately need to know that you are there for them. Have your child do everything with you, even if it does take you twice or 3 times as long. It may feel like you can't accomplish anything, but you are accomplishing something. You're helping to create a secure, happy child that loves to be with you. Let's say you're doing laundry. Put your 6-month-old in the basket. Give them a sock. When they reach about the age of 2, they can sort laundry with you. Tell them this one's white, it needs to go in this basket, and thank them for their help. This builds a sense of usefulness, and hey, you're teaching them colors too. How about doing dishes? Even before they can walk, sit them on the counter, give them a washcloth, and it may be messy, but you're helping to build those neural connections. At mealtimes, they could pour ingredients into a pan or carry non-breakables or help set the table. Remember, though, that your most important job during this age is to build emotional security. That is your most important job during the early years, is to build emotional security. And this is the time, the sensory motor stage from 0 to 2 years is the time when this is being developed. Be with your child at all times. Up until about 18 months, children don't understand what is known as object permanence. In other words, they think that if they can't see an object, it doesn't exist. So keep this in mind when you're leaving your infant. If he can't see you, he probably thinks that you no longer exist. Pick your child up if they want to be picked up. hold your child if they want to be held. There's no scientific basis whatsoever for this popular idea that holding your child too much will spoil them or create clinginess. In fact, the opposite is true. Talk with your child all throughout the day. This is fundamental to a child's emotional security. Be responsive. Respond when they communicate to you. Studies show that a warm, interactive environment in which parents talk with their children can significantly aid in language development, which in turn aids in reading development. The growth of significant interpersonal relationships during the first year of life is generally considered of primary importance for all later development, according to Dr. Raymond Moore. Be sure to have consistent and firm, loving discipline from day one. Keep regularity in the family schedule. Knowing what to expect gives the child security and can significantly help with discipline problems. A secure attachment with the mother provides the secure base from which they can launch out and return back to something that's consistent and secure, which is mom and dad. The quality of attachments between infants and their mothers has significant consequences for relationships at later stages of life. Children who are securely attached as infants tend to be more socially and emotionally competent later, and others view them more positively. Remember, at this age, no screen time. I can't stress this enough. Babies are forming deep emotional attachments at this time, so consider how much of an emotional attachment you want them to form to the screen rather than you. TVs, iPods, iPads, computers, electronics of any kind emit brain-damaging waves, and these waves suppress neural activity and growth. They're hypnotic, and while holding the child's attention, which is precisely why some parents like it so much, they are stealing time for important exploration. Good learning habits are formed by learning actively. The objects on a screen are not real, they're not touchable, they're not physically handleable, three-dimensional, real objects. The young mind can't process this because it literally does not understand anything that's not real-life objects. Electronics are terribly damaging to the mind, and this isn't even considering content or visual effects or damage to the eye itself. Oh, interestingly enough, studies have actually found that even simple audio recordings don't stimulate the young mind in the same way that a real human voice does. In one study, 9-month-old American infants who interacted with Mandarin-speaking adults acquired a sensitivity to the sounds of the Mandarin language, but not so for infants who were exposed to the language through audio and video media. Social interaction seems to be a critical part of language learning. Without social context, the language lessons were little more than meaningless noise to the infants. Another point, get off your device. And yes, you, I'm talking about you, the parent, not the child. Every minute you spend in front of your device or your computer or the television is a minute less you could be spending important time with your child, bonding, helping, guiding, molding his character for eternity. And these are just a few suggestions for the young child, of course. There are many more. Good nutrition, build emotional stability, allow time for exploration, allow time for quiet, have your child do everything with you, no screen time, get off your device. Now, the pre-operational stage, moving on, ages 2 through 7. Thinking abilities are progressing very rapidly during this period, but a child in this stage is not quite able to reason fully logically. And this is an age of intense curiosity, as any parent of a 5-year-old would tell you. A child of this age tends to be egocentric, as the science terms it. That just means that the way he thinks is completely based on himself and the experiences that he's had. He struggles to think outside of himself or from other people's viewpoints. A good example of this would be found in the often humorous explanations that children give for things that they don't understand. They're just relating it to what they do understand because they struggle to think outside of their own viewpoint. The capacity for symbolic thought, which is the ability to represent objects mentally, begins to develop now, but not not fully until much later. Things written down or shown on paper are difficult to comprehend. And it's not that it's impossible, but it's just much easier if he can actually do it. And because of this lack of symbolic thought, avoid telling your child anything untrue. This, of course, excludes fairies and Santa and the like, but also jokes and allegories. Because children of this age view everything in a very literal manner, it's also important to avoid things such as the Pilgrim's Progress, which is great material for the older child, but not so much at this young age. He can't quite wrap his mind around the symbolism. And as mentioned in a previous session, from about age 4 to 10, in boys, 4 to 7 in girls, the very important right hemisphere is developing. To help develop creativity, imagination, good thinking skills, and spirituality, allow the right hemisphere to develop naturally and unhurried by not trying to push the left hemisphere, which doesn't develop until later anyway. Some concepts are still just too difficult for the child to understand. Don't try to hurry learning. Just wait until the child is able to understand something naturally, and learning will take off. A really good example of this is the way that a child understands the principle of conservation. The concept of conservation is the understanding that the quality of something, rather the quantity of something, doesn't change even if the shape changes. So a classic example of this is if you were to take 2 glasses of equal size and put equal amounts of water in them, or any liquid, ask the child which one has more. He'll, of course, tell you that they both have the same amount. Now take one of them and pour it into a taller, narrower glass. Now, we adults know that the amount of liquid is going to stay the same. But you can do that in front of a child of this age, and he will tell you that the taller glass now contains more liquid than the shorter one. Even though he just saw you pour he saw the 2 same amounts, and he just saw you pour it in, he'll tell you the taller one has more. And that's just an example of a principle that they can't quite understand. So 2 options are presented to an educator or parent in the example of something that a child is incapable of understanding at this age. Option 1 is to teach the child that the amount of water does not change. This is what early schooling does. The child will learn this and could reproduce the answer on a test. Option 2 is to wait until the child's mind is capable of learning this on their own, and learn this way, the child will understand it to a greater depth. In other words, they'll get it. They really will understand the concept and will be able to apply it outside of that narrow example. At age 8, approximately, the understanding will come naturally. And studies have shown, actually, that a child may be taught this concept at an early age, but they won't really get it. They won't really understand it. According to the science, they really won't understand it well, at least not as well as if they had learned it from experience on their own. And according to Piaget, children, and everyone for that matter, have certain mental understandings of everything. He called them schemas, and they're based on previous experience. Every new experience either makes a child revise a current schema, a current mental understanding, or create a new one. And trying to explain your schema won't cement the learning nearly as well as if the child experiences it for himself. It is through countless first-hand experiences that children develop knowledge and the ability to manipulate it mentally. For this type of learning, parents or thoughtful caregivers are the first and the best teachers. Make learning as real and practical as possible. A child might be taught something, or they might learn it through experience and mental maturity. In one method, the child is taught. In the other, he learns. Again, don't push academics at this age. Work on the character development, on the emotional stability, on the moral training right now. Leave the academics for when the brain is ready for them. Research shows that your child's ultimate success in life will depend more on personal characteristics like motivation, creativity, and the ability to communicate effectively with other people than on whether he reads Dickens in the 4th grade. Here's some practical suggestions for the 2 to 7-year-old. Number 1, have your child do everything with you. Children generally love to help, and it's very beneficial for their brains to do so. Encourage your child to work with you in all the household activities. You can always find something for him to do. And a child of this age, the 2 to 7-year-old range, can actually begin to be a real help. He can start accepting responsibilities. Let him take part in all of the daily life and the work that needs done. Let him be part of the family operations. Let your child know he's appreciated, that he's needed, and that his contribution is valuable to the family. You might have to take more time and patience than if you did it yourself, but this is the best preschool and kindergarten education that he can have. You could have him get up on a chair and do dishes. He can do his own laundry and others' laundry too. Letting him do others' laundry will give him a sense of responsibility and will help him grow out of this mentality that everything revolves around him. Have him sweep the floor, set the table, put the clothes away. Help with meal preparations. By age 4, a child really should have a basic concept of most household duties. He should also be able to dress himself at age 4. Let him get his pants on backwards. That's how he learns. And number 2, just like with young children, let learning be incidental and practical. Learning possibilities are really almost limitless for the young child. Learn through everyday experience and then make it fun. Learn numbers in the kitchen through setting the table with addition and multiplication when there are guests over. A child of this age can grasp fractions if they're used in recipes. There was a little 7-year-old girl that was staying at our house because her mother was sick, and she did a recipe with my sister, and she learned fractions in real life for the first time. She'd been doing them in a book, but she did them for the first time in real life. And she later told her mom over the phone, "Mom, I like that kind of math much better." Even if a child cannot read, they can follow a recipe with you. Show them this says 2 cups of apples, and then they can go get the apples and they connect that word with the object. Learn and teach your child about anatomy and physiology and the health principles. Encourage them to make his own choices to keep his body healthy. Learn planning and counting skills by having him pack for a trip. Help him carefully think through everything he needs, and he might forget something, but don't bail him out. That's how he will learn to plan better next time. I'll be giving more examples of practical learning of academic subjects in the 3rd session of the Parents' Best Curriculum. Point number 3, for a child of this age, talk together. Language development and vocabulary is growing by leaps and bounds during this age, but how will they learn language unless they have a chance to use it, to interact with others? Be sure to use a meaningful and rich vocabulary. Don't just use the simple words. They need to hear the big ones to develop their own vocabulary well. The same applies in choosing what you read for them. If you've talked to them using meaningful conversation with the big words, then when you start reading to them, there won't be any need to use the little kindergarten books. You can use real big sentences and big words, and they can actually enjoy it. Engage in meaningful conversation. Answer those millions of questions in a meaningful way. Talk with rather than to your child. Encourage an atmosphere where the child is free to discuss anything on his mind. Spend the one-on-one time together if at all possible. You'll be glad you did when he's a teenager. If he's developed that relationship with you and he's free to talk with you, there will be many benefits later in life. For the little child, you can talk about the colors, the textures, the sounds, prickly green grass, the rough brown tree. Consider the child's point of view and try to discuss things that he would be interested in. Children really aren't interested in abstract things that adults are, like facts and figures and numbers. If you doubt your skills in language communication, your language abilities, then to help lay a good foundation in English and in grammar skills for your child, buy a grammar and writing textbook for you, not the child. Study it and apply those skills that in your daily conversation, and your children will learn proper speech far better than if they had studied it in a book, in school. Number 4, spend some time in nature. I'll be talking about that more in the next session. Number 5, let them make their own mistakes and learn from them. Children learn best from experience. If he wants to save a snowball in his pocket, let him try. He'll learn that it doesn't work. Self-help and household jobs are very important for the child to master. Help your child, but encourage him to do it himself, even if the job isn't done exactly your way. I have worked with children, according to Dr. Healy, I have worked with children who are afraid to attempt even simple tasks because mom has always jumped in and done the job for them. Be sure to let your child make reasonable choices whenever possible. Learning to make simple decisions and minor mistakes is hard but necessary. Children's conception of reality needs to include close personal experience with cause and effect. Now, of course, don't go to the opposite extreme. I once worked with a little boy who, he was very capable of any household task, but that was because he had been forced to, because his mother and his parents were not always there for him. And he had plenty of interaction with other siblings, but he had been sort of forced to fend for himself because of the negligence of his parents. And the emotional and behavioral results were not good at all. By all means, be with your child at all times, but just allow them to figure things out for themselves. Number 6, no screen time. The same thing applies. Everything I've discussed for the younger children applies here. Number 7, get off your device. And that's you. Go spend some time with your children. Number 8, encourage emotional stability and security. This is especially true for infants and toddlers, but it continues to be of utmost importance for children of this age in the pre-operational stage of 2 to 7 years. Be consistent, be reliable, maintain a schedule. Have clear, firm, enforced, reasonable expectations with jobs that are the child's own responsibility. Be responsive. Many discipline problems can be completely avoided by simply being responsive to your children. Answer your children. Answer your child when he asks you a question. Teach him not to interrupt, of course, but don't just ignore him. It really can help with discipline problems. I was once doing some observations in a home, and there was a little, if I remember correctly, she was about 3 years old, the little girl. And it was breakfast time. The mother was doing some work at a stove, and they had company that day. So the mother was engaged in conversation with her guest. And the little girl sweetly asked, "Mommy, can I please have some oatmeal?" And the mother kept continuing this conversation with her guest. "Mommy, can I please have some oatmeal?" The mother kept talking. "Mommy, can I please have some oatmeal?" In her sweet little 3-year-old voice. "Mommy, can I please have some oatmeal?" She's trying so hard to be good, and the mother's just ignoring her, continuing this conversation with her guest. "Mommy, can I please have some oatmeal?" The mother keeps talking. "Mommy, can I please have some oatmeal?" She keeps talking. "Mommy, can I please have some oatmeal?" This went on for, she must have said it 20, 25 times. This poor little girl in her sweet little voice, trying to be good. Finally, she gave up. She just yelled. She goes, "Mommy, give me some oatmeal." At which point the mom turned around, looked at her child and said, "Is that how we talk?" Another way to encourage emotional security is to maintain a schedule. As I've mentioned, overload, stress, too many distractions are harmful to brain development, and the brain needs this quiet, relaxed time to organize and explore at the child's own pace. But schedule is also critical. The day needs to be structured and be consistent for the emotional well-being of the child. So how do we kind of reconcile these two inconsistencies, seeming inconsistencies? It's important that they have a schedule, but the schedule should be a tool and not a dictator. A schedule should provide a sense of security and a knowledge of the order of the day for a child, but not this precise dictator that just controls every movement. In the younger years, a schedule doesn't need to run precisely off the clock, with the exception of mealtimes and bedtimes, of course, but rather make it sequential. After this activity, after this job, we're going to do something else. Like after breakfast, we go do the laundry. And even a baby can understand this, and it provides that sense of structure and reliability. Make sure the child understands and knows the structure. When a child knows the order of events, in what order things occur, it provides a sense of security and greatly helps with discipline problems. If a child is doing something that needs to stop because it's time to go do something else, then he won't have much of a problem because he knows it ahead of time. And this might take some reminding in the early years, but a child can learn it quickly if it's kept consistent. Now, I emphasized needs a moment ago. It has to stop because it's something important to remember. Look for incidental learning opportunities. Don't stop studying the ant because it's time to go learn science. Don't stop counting tomatoes because it's time to go learn math. The stage of concrete operations from 7 to 11, or about age 12, it's not really precise, about 7 to 11 or 12. Representation and symbolic thought begin to develop very quickly at this age, but he still can't fully understand abstract objects. It's called a stage of concrete operations because thought still centers around what he can physically understand. And he now understands the principle of conservation. Thought is centered around the present, the here and now, but they can begin to be encouraged to think outside of that, to look to the future, to recall things from the past. He can think about actions that he once had to actually perform. It's an important time of developing inner speech and being able to internalize action and thought. The left hemisphere, which is the one that deals with logic, mathematics, and other academic functions, begins developing at this age, and it begins adding a better understanding of detail, of linear processing, of refinement of language. Often reading and writing development occur naturally at this age, and math understanding. The frontal lobe begins, now not completes, but begins myelination at about age 8 in girls, about age 10 in boys, and this will begin adding a lot more fine motor control, the ability to internalize concepts, reasoning, and a better moral understanding. At about age 9 or 10, there's an increase in corpus callosum myelination. Now, the corpus callosum is helped develop by crawling early in life, but at age 9 or 10, there's an increase in myelination. Why do you think this is? Well, the corpus callosum connects the hemispheres. So now that the left hemisphere is myelinating and developing, it's adding connections to the right hemisphere to help create true whole brain thinking. And just as crawling helps develop it early in life, any physical activity, whole body activities that involve using both hands, switching between both hands, like gardening, very excellent example. If you're planting something, you're going to use both hands. This helps develop this important brain area. Formal education can be introduced at this stage. So finally, time to break out those books that you've been saving and just let him have it, right? Well, not so fast. The brain areas for academic subjects are beginning to myelinate now. They're not finished developing. A parent needs to be extremely aware of how the child is developing, and just because a child is 8 doesn't mean it's time to just sit down and throw him into a full regimen of academics. If a child doesn't get it, he probably doesn't quite understand it yet, and don't push it. Just give him some time and he'll soon be able to understand it with very little trouble. Many concepts will actually begin to be understood naturally as he develops without the parent even doing anything. Many of the previous activities still apply here. Let's run through them quickly. Number 1, do everything together. Be a part of your child's life. 2, continue to make learning incidental and practical. Number 3, engage in meaningful conversation. Remember to always be available and supportive for your child. 4, practical, useful work and responsibilities. A child of this age can be a significant help in the family and should know that he is. Now, some jobs may still be too unsafe, like running a chainsaw to cut firewood may be not appropriate for this age, but he really should be able to attend to nearly every household duty. Point number 5, let him make his own mistakes. Continue as far as possible to let him make his own mistakes, Don't bail him out. He needs to develop those thinking and reasoning abilities, and this is the best way for him to do it. Point number 6, have him keep his own financial records. Teach your child to have a budget and to stick with it. We're going to talk more about how to earn money and how to apply that in the next session. Continue to spend even more time in nature. Seek to draw out those learning opportunities and spiritual lessons in everything. Number 8, no screen time. The same rules still apply here. And I want to note that psychologists recommend no screen time until about age 7. Now, it still can be damaging after age 7. Studies haven't found very many beneficial effects of media at any age, but they found plenty of damaging ones. So keep screen time to a minimum. Number 9, get off your device. Continue to spend as much time as possible with your child. Number 10, practical schooling. As I mentioned, you can begin to introduce small amounts of academics, but caution is advised, especially with boys. Remember that the eyes are not fully developed until age 9, and so stressing them before that age can cause damage, including myopia. But you can still learn through practical ways. Like with reading, use reading and books as a means of obtaining useful, necessary information, and no more. If he can't read, no problem, don't worry, he can learn to read later. In math, encourage mental math through everyday tasks. Mental math, especially when related to a practical task, helps cement those math concepts in the brain. Science. The natural world is an amazing science teacher. Encourage plenty of exploration. Continue to study about anatomy and physiology and the health principles. Encourage him to make choices to keep his body healthy. Have him learn the importance of physical activity and of sufficient sleep, which I hope is part of your family's schedule already. With English, as I mentioned before, use proper English in your speech and he'll learn it by default. I'll be going more into school subjects in part 3 of A Parent's Best Curriculum, so I'm going to leave that for this right now. Be careful not to encourage a facts-based mind in your child. Guide him to deeper thinking, to connected thought. Pay attention to opportunities that fall in your lap, because they will if you're watching for them. Don't just give quick answers, but rather encourage your child to think and to formulate the answers on his own. And remember, you don't have to know everything. If you don't know it, learn it together. It's a lot more fun that way. Focus on the process of learning and not just the results. These are just a few of the practical ways to work with your child's developing mind. There are many more. Be attentive, be creative, be prayerful. God will help you do what is right for your child. I'll see you in part 2 as we look at practical ways to implement activities in the daily life. What activities are really good for the young child? We're going to be looking at that more in depth.